Well, I absolutely love that song and always enjoy when we get to sing it. You know, sometimes there are songs that they sound really good and the lyrics are just so-so. And then there are other songs that the lyrics are powerful and maybe they don't sound quite as good depending on the song. But that's one that I always look at and say, the lyrics that we just sang there, "This is my Father's world," is such a wonderful picture, and the way that it concludes as well. We're talking about the God of all things, and as we're looking at different ways that God has revealed Himself to us through the world, what we're really doing is considering that while God created the material world, this world, for all sorts of purposes, one of the things that God does with the world that He has made is He uses what He has made to share something about who He is, to help us in our ability to understand something about God. Now, there's a host of things, we named them, a host of these different material created things that serve as a metaphor in Scripture. You named a whole bunch of them. Last week we talked about salt and how God uses salt to communicate spiritual truth to us as a powerful metaphor, and we'll look at another one to this morning. But these things that God has made for many purposes, but everything that God has made in some way reflects the character of God back to us. There's a reason that when people stand at a waterfall, for example, there's a sense of contemplation that comes upon you, to look at something vast, or the Grand Canyon or something like that, to stand there and to see beauty that is not perfectly explainable as just a series of natural phenomena, but rather seems to be saying something to us. This has been the human experience since the beginning, looking up into the sky and seeing all of the stars and wondering. Maybe you remember this story. You remember the story of Sherlock Holmes, maybe. He and Watson are camping, and as they're camping, he elbows Watson, and Watson wakes up. It's 2 a.m., and he says, "Look up at the stars. What do you see?" And Watson, ever so scholarly, says, "Well, I suppose," he's shaking the sleep out of his eyes, "I suppose I see there's Orion's belt and there's the Big Dipper, and I see that even in the vastness of the universe there's some kind of order." He says, "What do you see, Sherlock?" And he says, "That someone's stolen our tent." Okay. But there is something there's something out there in the way that we see the beauty of the world and the creation of the world that speaks to things about God's existence, the God of all things. I want to take you to Acts chapter 14 this morning as we kind of begin. We'll have plenty of discussion momentarily. Acts 14, this is verse 8 through 10. As you can see on the easel here, right? So we've got a nice frame there. Paul and Barnabas are on their missionary journey, and they've come to a place called Lystra. And in Lystra there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking, and Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that the man jumped up and began to walk. Paul and Barnabas haven't exactly received a warm welcome where they had been, so they've come to Lystra, and they found this man who has been from his birth unable to walk, and as the apostles regularly do in the book of Acts, they bring the healing of Christ with them to various people, and he says to him, "Get up on your feet and walk," and he sprang up and began walking. But here's what happens as a result of this wonderful healing. The people of Lystra, they come and gather around. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. The crowd witnesses a powerful sign, and they interpret that sign according to their paradigm of understanding, right? According to the way that they view the world. They worship Zeus and as a result Hermes and various others. And as they see this man that has been healed, they take that through the lens of their own gods, their own stories, and say, okay, well, obviously, Paul and Barnabas must be in some way the incarnation of the gods. Zeus has come down. Now, the Greek gods would take human form and stuff fairly regularly in their stories, so it's not quite like the Christian claim. But nevertheless, they're saying the gods have come down to us in the likeness of men. So much so that they're gathered out there, ready to worship and offer sacrifices to them. There's a little aside here, which is it not true that when we have a way of seeing something, when presented with a new piece of evidence, we find a way to fit it into the way that we see things, right? So they believe in Zeus. There's a sign that happens. They find a way to fit that into their belief system. That is what is one of the things that's so challenging about changing our belief system. Is it's so easy for us to find little ways or big ways to try to stretch our current way of seeing things just big enough to incorporate different pieces of information. Nevertheless, Paul and Barnabas, they say, of course, this will not do. When the apostles heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We too are only human, like you. We bring you good news, telling you to turn from worthless things to the living God, who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past, he let all nations go their own way." Now, just pause there for a second. Paul seizes the opportunity to try to turn their lack of knowledge or their misunderstanding toward the proper understanding, to move from their, as he says, their worthless gods, their idols, and turn toward the, as he says, living God. And so he's trying to seize this opportunity to preach to them essentially the message about God. But this is what he says in verse 15. He says, "Yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown his kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." Even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowds from sacrificing to them. It's an interesting thing that Paul, in his sermon, essentially, the punchline is that they ought to turn to the living God because of rain. He says he's not left himself. I'm going to do this all day, just so you know. There's right there, you see it. He says he's not left you without testimony. He sent you something. He sent you rain from heaven, and as a result, the crops in their season. He gave you rain. Turn to the living God because of rain. Here's the question for you as we kind of begin to discuss this. What is Paul drawing their attention to when he wants them, in his opportunity to preach to them, to turn their attention to rain? What do you want them to see? The power of the Lord? What else? Yeah, rain is essential to life. Water for drinking, the growth of food, it's essential in every way. So what is Paul, in other words, getting at here when he's talking about rain? God will take care of you, or has taken care of you. Exactly. God in his providential care is causing rain to come and sustaining your life even though you don't know him, even though you don't believe in him, even though all this time you've been worshiping these various other gods, right? This is the idea behind, and you can turn there, but I'll put on the slide as well. It's the idea behind Matthew 5, verse 45, right? When Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. In the context of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' message is about loving your enemies. And Jesus uses this picture of rain for a reason. In the nations around the people of Israel, not only did they not worship the one true God, at times they were and would be directly hostile to the one true God. And yet what happened in the spring? Raining again. Jesus says, to expand, he says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven." In other words, then he says that. In other words, Jesus says that to love your enemy is to be like the Father. Because there are many enemies in that sense. People who are rejecting God, resisting what God is doing, and he says God sends them rain every day. Not literally, but he sends them rain. He calls the sun to come up yet again to shine light upon their path. And then he says this, "If you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same?" Far be it from us to think that you have heard it said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy," is a mentality that has been left in the past. That is as natural to us as anything, isn't it? Of course, I want to love the people that are close to me and hate the people that are not, whether that be literally or ideologically or whatever the case might be. But Jesus says God causes his sun to rise on the good and the evil alike, and he sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. This is similar. Jesus, as he often does, is playing on something from the Old Testament in Psalm 145, verse 9. The Lord is good to all, to everyone. He has compassion on all he has made. In other words, this psalm is not about the people of Israel. This is about all of creation, everyone. He goes on and says, "The eyes of everyone look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time." This is the idea that Paul is drawing on in Acts 14, and certainly what Jesus is getting at when he speaks in Matthew chapter 5. Historically, this idea has been referred to, I'm sure you probably heard me refer to it in this way, it's been referred to as common grace. It's the idea that God is gracious to the world in a number of ways, that it's not about salvation, forgiveness, finding Jesus. It's simply about God being good to people, regardless of whether they are good to Him. I see you. Yeah, for sure. And in their case, they're even associating it with a higher power, just the wrong one, right? They're thinking that it's one of their gods that has accomplished this. Really, they're thinking, hey, the gods have come down to visit us. This idea that God is good to all, He shows grace to all. I just want to, you can brainstorm these quickly. I mean, we don't have to. We could fill probably a book with all the different ways, but just tell me, what are some of the common graces that God extends to the globe, to the world? There's an order to how the weather works, right? And despite our criticism of the forecasters, let's be real, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. So we're able to make informed decisions about how to grow things, where to grow things, when, all those things. Yeah, great. What else? Changing of the seasons. Other things. Is God good to the world? Well, tell me about it. Yeah. Provision. He's given the world a number of provisions, including water. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. This whole life cycle of how things work, yeah. Yeah. It is really nice to live in a world of such order, right? Where we can predict reliably how things are going to play out in terms of the natural world. What goes up must come down, and objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and there's no such thing as an uncaused cause that is part of the physical world and all those kinds of things. I see another hand somewhere. Shannon? Yeah, it's amazing just how children learn language, right? That we don't really, we might teach our children to speak in various ways, but we really don't teach them language. They just are in it, and they're making all of those connections and learning. Yeah. Sure, yeah, offering the world the grace that comes through Christ, for sure. Let's go to the point about children and that kind of thing for just a second, and pull on that thread a little bit, because I definitely agree with everything you've said. That God has been gracious to us in a number of ways in the world, but someone who is totally non-religious probably is not necessarily living in a state of passion and zeal because God made the life cycle, or something like that. What is it that God has given to the world, even apart from Christ, that brings joy into people's lives? Children, friendship, marriage, relationships. A huge part of that. What about, is God gracious to provide people meaningful things to do in the world, even if they may not be directly serving Jesus, or at least intentionally in the process? What about, we think about individuals experiencing this common grace, and we're already getting at this, but when we think about actual individual human beings, and we're thinking about how is God good to just the individual human being? He gives them, yes, of course, the things around them materially that they need, or at least He has given, let's put it this way, God has given the world everything it needs for the world to survive and thrive. The sad reality is, it is also true that human beings have thwarted the care of other human beings throughout the world. You know that we produce more food than would be sufficient to feed the entire world, and then some every year. We have a hunger problem in the world, but it's not a food problem. It's a human being problem, right? But nevertheless, God has provided with given provisions, but He's also given us ways to access even something that goes beyond the material existence of life in love and relationships. What about in terms of creativity and art? Think about the talent that God has given to some individuals, that to all, but also to some individuals that are far beyond their moral character might deem warranted. I will not require you to name any names about that, but listen, are there actors, let's say, that are enormously talented at portraying characters on screen, and then you find out they've been involved in some really, really problematic behaviors outside of their acting career? Sure, you could pick any number of other illustrations, but does what they have done outside, off of the screen, it may take away from it if you're really thinking about it, but is it still possible to see a movie that they're in and say, wow, that was an amazing performance, right? Because God gives talent and gifts beyond people's moral deserving of them, or beyond their merit, maybe I should say. The same thing we could think about with music and any art, creative expression, maybe put it that way. Those talents are far beyond creativity, but the point that I'm making is God's given us a world of beauty. He's given us a world of order, but He's also given us a world where beauty is possible. Possible to create, possible to be seen, to be marveled at, and a lot of talented people that are involved in that process. So in various ways, God sort of sprinkles upon the world to use a rain image, relationships, provisions, wealth, talents, and more upon the world. And the question that we ask is simply this: is it fair? Is it fair? To what degree does it challenge our sense of how things ought to be that God causes His rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike? You see, you read Matthew 5:45, and at first you're like, how sweet is that, you know? But then you realize there's some really, really wicked people out there. Some people that do a lot of horrific things and yet have been blessed in immeasurable ways, in a sense, maybe not immeasurable, but been blessed far beyond their righteousness, let's say. And the question is that a challenge? Is it fair? True. Yeah, good. Other thoughts? Is there a challenge here to our conception of what is fair and unfair in Matthew 5? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, agree. To use Mary's analogy of a parent-child, which is, of course, she's getting from Jesus' analogy here, it's definitely true that a parent doesn't stop loving their child no matter what happens, and in that sense, providing for them in various ways. It's also true that parents start removing blessings when children start doing things they shouldn't do. And I think there's a lengthy treatment amongst various psalms where the psalmists have wrestled with why God doesn't take the keys away from some people in the world that are using their blessings to damage the world and to damage the people of God. This idea, oh Lord, how long shall the wicked exult? Are you going to keep sending rain forever? You know, are you going to keep giving them? You give them the rain, they produce the crops, they sell the crops, they have the money, they stay in power, and this is what happens. This is how things keep going. How long? How long will you allow them to dwell in safety and security while your people suffer and die? That's a question that they wrestle with. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Amen to that. Absolutely. And I think Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13:8 maybe, love never fails. You know, and that's the idea behind what you're getting at. Appreciate that. I just wonder as we're reading these kinds of things, if our context is significantly different from the context of Jesus' audience, and as such, Jesus' words here may sting us a little less than they might have stung his audience. I didn't see Andrew. Sorry, I started in on the next. Go ahead. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well said. And I think, and I may have put this in an article in the bulletin a number of weeks ago, but I believe that Augustus Caesar Octavian was, I think he had a net worth, if you want to call it that, they estimated at somewhere like, in modern money, like $3 trillion or something like that, because he owned a massive personal fortune and probably also, I don't remember what percentage historians think he owned in terms of the actual like GDP of the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, $4 trillion was not enough to deliver Octavian from a lot of problems. And so, well said. We look at this passage to play off of what many of you have said. We look at this passage, and I think part of the challenge in reading this comes from the fact that most of us in this room, well, in a sense, every single one of us in this room is blessed with an enormous amount of divine provision in terms of our day-to-day life. We think about the place that we live and the wealth that we as Americans possess. And when Jesus says, hey, good things happen to bad people, well, that's all right. Good things have happened to me, right? So that's okay. They happen to other people. But the challenge perhaps comes in when we are on the other end of that power dynamic, where we are actively suffering in some way because of those who are evil and who have power over us. And Jesus is saying, your enemies, the ones who have their, boot on your neck, pray for them, and God sends them rain and causes their crops to grow. Now, there's a sting there to that. And I think the point is exactly what Andrew is saying and what others are saying is we're thinking perhaps through the wrong paradigm. This idea, you can call it legalism, you can call it whatever you want, but it comes naturally to us that good things should only happen to good people. And bad things should only happen to bad people. And that was their problem, as Dan said, in terms of the rich man or the rich person and going into heaven and all that. It's also their problem in John 9 with the man born blind. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Bad things have to happen to bad people, right? Well, that mindset is so easy for us to slip into. It's a mindset that views ourselves as good and other people as bad, and it sees, to Andrew's point, all of the blessings, material things, as goods in themselves. And as a result, if we really put ourselves in that mentality, grace might not be as easy a thing to believe in. It certainly wasn't for them. This was a controversial teaching that Jesus gives. But the question that we are forced to ask in that line of thinking is simply, what do I deserve? What am I owed? And the moment that we begin to ask that question, we have an opportunity to do one of two things. One is to continue to bathe ourselves in pride and to bask in the glow of our greatness. The other is to take a sober look at our heart, using the Sermon on the Mount, and to realize that Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not murder. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother is liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. And that's a sampling, right, of the Sermon on the Mount. But there is embedded in this question that we ask, why do bad things happen to, good things happen to bad people? There's a call of introspection to say, well, on what grounds do I call myself good? And the tricky thing about claiming oneself as good is it can't be in relation to God. Everyone will say, well, of course, okay, I'm not perfect, but I'm pretty good. in relation to what are you good? And it's always in relation to other people. And so the claim to be good is always a claim to be superior to other people. And that claim is a path that leads, has led, and will continue to lead the world into much suffering. Let's go back to rain. Rain has made life possible on our planet for millennia, for as long as the earth has been around. And if you think about rain as Paul uses it and as Jesus uses it, rain is kind of like an anonymous love letter from the Creator saying, here I am again, taking care of you. I still haven't left. I still haven't gone anywhere. Paul says that the way God has provided for the world is this testimony to the people of even a Greek worshiping culture, a Greek gods worshiping culture, that God still cares for them and is still concerned for them and is calling them to know Him not as an anonymous creator, but as the one true living God. I just want to encourage you as we close this morning. I want to encourage you to take a minute. By the way, it's supposed to rain like every day this week, okay? So, perfect timing. I caused that, selecting this. Will you take a minute when it's raining and thank God for His care for you? I better check my phone for the time. My watch, that watch, and my phone never agree. Okay, all right. I used to sit right here. This is a view from the house that I grew up on, a little deck that we had. I watched a mountain lion walk across this fence line one time, but that's another story. And this is what it looked like most of the time. There were not a lot of clouds that were accumulating there very often, very clear most of the time, but very rarely, occasionally, it would rain. And I can remember when I was a teenager, one of the most relaxing, wonderful places that I could find myself would be sitting on our deck in one of our chairs and just listening to it rain. Take some opportunity to stop and listen to the rain this week and thank God for the ways that He continues to care for us. All right. We'll look forward to visiting more, and thank you for your comments.